KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother, Dagan, the produce man, Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today. How are you, my friend?
I got your apples. I got your oranges.
You got everything. I remember you working there so vividly. I'm sure we'll get into it today on our episode about jobs. I've been listening. So I've been watching Stranger Things, which I had not watched past the first season.
Oh, you started.
And so I'm in the third season now with Micah, and there's just so many good songs in it. Just amazing. And Bon Jovi's "Runaway" from their first record came out.
Hell yeah, dude.
On the street where you live, girls talk about their social lives. Oh my God, it's so good. They made a lipstick, plastic, and paint. A torture sable in their eyes.
Nobody ever thinks of like pre-Slippery When Wet.
Yeah.
Bon Jovi, right?
But that's the shit. I think that's the first song on that first record, which is like, the bang. Bang. Yeah. Oh my God.
I was
that's
so obsessed with Richie Sambora that I don't know how I didn't start playing guitar.
He's awesome.
Oh, he was the shit. Like, we just wanted to be that guy. You know, he was like our generation's Jimmy Page. I mean, I hate to put him in the same category as Jimmy Page, but no, I think that he probably is in the same category as Jimmy Page. I mean, Bon Jovi's no joke. You know, yeah, that's fun. It's fun. It is interesting that you never picked up an instrument because you do have a deep love of music. I do.
Yeah.
But
what was like the instrument what's the instrument you fucked around with when you were in middle school or whatever?
Well, everyone had an instrument. Story.
Everyone has that instrument.
Fourth grade was our entree into music, right? We could join band or orchestra and do our thing. So I wanted to play drums, and mom and dad, we always laugh about this to this day, you and I, because they were like, absolutely not. And there was really like no reason for it. It was just like, you're not playing drums. And it was literally like, you know, that little wooden drum pad with the rubber pad on it.
Yeah.
With the sticks. That's what I would have brought home.
It's so you can do your rudiments or whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like a 20-piece drum set or a bass drum or something. And then I went down the line and was like, I'll play saxophone. They were like, no way. I'll play trumpet. Nope. It was like, why? Yeah. I still don't understand why.
What are you supposed to play?
I was down to two things. You could play you could play clarinet or flute.
Oh, they wanted you to play like a woodwind little light instrument so that they didn't have to.
Why. I still to this day do not understand the explanation why. So of course I had to choose clarinet because, you know, think of this is 1983 or something.
Yeah, you can't play the flute.
I would have been sitting with all the girls with the flute, and with the clarinet I was sitting with 80% girls, but at least there was two other dorks in there. Right.
Yeah, no, I tell you why they want you to play those instruments because they're the quietest. I mean, they're loud, but I would imagine why. Now, here's the funny thing.
Right.
About how done, especially mom was by the time it came to me. What did I play in fourth grade? What did I want to play? The saxophone. And that's what I played. And then and then I just started playing drums too. So it was
with the full on drum set. And
then I took piano lessons for a couple of years as well. So
that's right.
So I was, which is what taught me really how to read music. So I was all over the place. So they didn't give a fuck. You know, I got my own drum kit, I think in 8th or 9th grade finally. And I basically begged dad for it. I think he just was like, fine, just shut up.
Oh, was it that? It was that late? Like late in junior high, early in high school. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So it's not as funny as my story. The way I spin it, I'm like, oh, Colin had a full on drum set when he was 6, you know, type of thing. So.
Well, I did have like a shittier drum set when I was a kid, but I mean, a proper like rock drum set. Yeah.
Then you had,
it wasn't until I think 8th grade, something like that. I used to play my friend Bryce's all the time. He's the one who got me into drums. And he was just a really great multi-instrumentalist. I haven't talked to him in years, but he's a good guy. He comes up every once in a while because his dad's the guy that owned the antique store that we worked at.
Sure.
And ironically, today is an episode all about jobs. That's not one of them I'm going to talk about. So before I throw it over to you for anything you want to talk about, I must say that I very carefully went through the KnockBack list to make sure we never did this episode because I'm so paranoid now about it.
Paranoid about it.
I Google it. Like, I don't trust Google anymore. It's not telling me all the adequate information.
You got to scroll through the list. I wish somebody would make a document so I didn't have to scroll through the Zencaster or whatever, iTunes or whatever. But yeah, I'm so paranoid about it. And there was a period like 3 days ago where it dawned on me that we did it for some reason. And I was like, I don't know. I feel like we've done it.
But we didn't. As far as I can tell, we didn't do it. As far as I can tell, we didn't do it. So anything you want to talk about before we get into the topic at hand?
Well, it's really ironic that you bring up Bon Jovi because this is something that's really plaguing my mind a little bit, Kyle. So Helene was in the spring and the summertime. She was intermittently reminding me or bringing it to my attention. She's like, have you seen this thing? Like the teenagers are bringing back the mullet. And not only the mullet, but the whole 80s kit. So like the short shorts, neon colored tank tops,
the glasses,
white socks with white Reeboks, the glasses, the biker caps, anything 80s is like in play. And I was like, no, that's weird. I couldn't picture it. And then as the spring turned into summer and we were down the shore, I definitely noticed it. Like kids were full on rocking, the business on the top, party in the back, spiked haircut with the long mullet, maybe even a little rat stash. And I was like, holy shit, they brought the whole look back. But then it dawned on me, and I was talking to Helene a week or two ago, and I was like, you know what, though? This is what's really interesting about the mullet specifically. In the 80s, I was in junior high, so probably 7th grade. It was around that same time we started going to house parties and stuff. Like we were kind of becoming big kids. And that's the time I remember dudes my age rocking the mullet. They had the spiky hair on top. Usually it was the kids with relatively straight hair, and then they had the long hair in the back. Maybe some of them still had the little rat tail in the back, like the little braided bit in the back.
I had a rat tail, as you may recall.
I do remember that, dude. So fun. And but you know what? By the time the 80s started turning into the 90s and the mullet started to go out of fashion for most people, right? That's when the remaining people, like the people that fell behind the times, like maybe, I don't want to stereotype, but maybe people outside the Northeast that were a little fashion forward or on the cutting edge fashion wise, right? Like they kept going with the mullet. And I feel like that's when it started to get called the mullet. Like it wasn't called the mullet while people were rocking it. It was only later on, ironically, people would say, oh, you were rocking a mullet, business on the top, party in the back, that whole thing. So when the mullet used to be in style, it wasn't even called a mullet. Like it was just accepted.
Right.
Now
what it was, yeah.
They're bringing it back ironically. So you would think the kids know that it's almost like they're rocking it in a jokey fashion, right? So now and I don't know how I feel about that. And also that really marks my old madmanship. But also I don't know if this is marking a trend going forward. Like, is everything going to be brought back ironically now? Because fashions come in a cyclical way. And usually when something comes back in style, it's with a slightly different spin. Think of like bell bottoms or something like that. It's not the same as they put a little flourish on it. Now I think things are going to be brought back just ironically, right? It's almost like the idea of a rip-off graphic. Right. It's like taking something and making it into something else, like playing off something else and making it a joke. And I see it with skateboarding too. Like kids are rocking the 90s big and tall, like way oversized raver pants, like the big cutoff jeans and stuff like that. And I don't know if I'm really feeling it. Like I would rather go do something new, like leverage a new look rather than play on something old in a jokey way. So I think we're in for this in the next decade or so with this generation. Like, I think they're just going to take everything old and basically make fun of us, I think is what's going on here.
It could be that that's always been the way it's been, but I don't know for sure. It seems a little bit more, there's more of a record of the past now that you can go back and look at. And so I think it's just there for the taking.
That's a good point.
Couple things about the mullet though. Number one, is I remember growing up in the 80s and into the 90s, and the hatred of mullets was so vociferous that looking back on it, I can't even understand it. And also about there's different subcategories. The skullet. Classic look, hockey hair. I mean, that's kind of the thing. Hockey hair never went away. And as a hockey fan, I played with people that had mullets. Everyone in the NHL has mullets to this day. You know, it just doesn't really go away. That flappy kind of hair in the background. It's very much a hockey staple.
Never stopped.
And hockey has always been very ironic in its style. If you follow some of the players online, like they're very good looking dudes, very stylish, but there's always a piece of irony to it. Like the hair is ridiculous, or they don't have their front teeth or whatever. Like, a lot of hockey players like don't get their teeth fixed until the end of the season, or maybe even after years, because they just keep getting their teeth knocked out. So they worry about it when their career is done. The other thing I have to bring up to you though, Dave, that I think you'll appreciate. I don't know if you're onto this. I've only seen a few pictures of this, but apparently it's like a thing.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of or looked up stuff where it's like people put up pictures where it looks like there's a time traveler in the picture? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
And there's a specific picture. I got to find it for you from the 40s, I think, or maybe like early 50s of a dude who looks like the dude from Big Lebowski. And it's like, where did you, he's got like glasses on, like a t-shirt, like a robe and a he looks 50 years ahead of his time. And it's like, and I'm like, and it's so funny. People find these little pictures and they're like, look at this. And it's crazy. It's like, holy shit, this guy was like generations ahead of his time. I can't believe it. And I love that kind of stuff. You got to go look that up if you guys are out there. And
that's so crazy. That plays into your point too, of just having these things on record for comparison.
Like people that just straight up, it's like, is this a Photoshop? But it isn't. It's good stuff. I love it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a rabbit hole to go down for sure. Ugh.
Oh man, don't even get me started. I'm all on Reddit now. Like I'm 10 to 15 years late on everything. Right. So now I've come around to Reddit, and I don't log in. I just like use the app, but I'm on that thing like all over the place. There's so many good subreddits. First of all of the fighting subreddits I love, like all the random people fighting in Walmart and gas stations, Wawa, all that stuff. So I'm there. But also there's like, anti-work is a really good one about people just melting down at work and like quitting or doing all these kinds of stuff. There's so many good ones.
Oh, man. Dude, this is too tempting. You're tempting me right now.
Am I the Asshole, of course, is a famous one, and all the rest. Okay. Let's get into the topic at hand, which is
all right.
The jobs that we worked as youth. I figured we would I wanted to talk about a couple things, which is like pre-job jobs. What did you do for money before that? Because I think I wanted a little bit of insight into that. But then I focused in on, there's really like 4 things that I did for a living, in quotes, while I was in high school and college. And I think that's where I want to cut it off before we become professionals, obviously, and go into the real world.
Sure.
So talk to me a little bit about, Dig. I want to know a little bit about your pre-job jobs. Before you ever worked like a real job, how did you make your money? Because I think back on this, and I was quite aggressive as a kid in trying to make money. I would like mow people's lawns. I'd weed their gardens and do all this stuff, sell lemonade and whatever. Like I would do whatever. And it's so funny thinking back on it, because I am so insular now that I was quite outgoing as a kid. That was robbed from me along with everything else. So I always like thinking about that, about how I bought my hockey cards or my GI Joes or whatever. It was usually through some entrepreneurial pursuit. And I'm wondering what you did as a kid before you got your first real job.
Yeah, I love starting it there. That's really fun. Yeah, it's funny to think of you with like lemonade stands. And when you're a kid, you don't have any of those inhibitions. You're not saddled by that social anxiety. So you make the sign and you go and ask for the neighbors for money and serve them the shitty lemonade. It's such a fun memory because I still see it now in the neighborhood with kids younger than mine. It's nothing changed. Some of those things don't change, which is interesting. I was really lucky as a kid because I think mostly because I had grandma and grandpa totally just giving me cash nonstop on a weekly basis. So it wasn't until a little later, plus buying me things for no reason. They were the ones that kind of filled in that space between Christmas and birthdays and maybe like Easter or report cards. Like they were the ones like taking me to the toy store for no good reason. And just like, here's a G.I. Joe figure. Here's a Star Wars thing. But eventually I did need money, and you just need money as a kid, like for the ice cream man, right? For like just trips to the store where mom's not going to shell out the $5 for the action figure or the little transformer or something. So I think the first thing I did that mom and dad were in agreement with when I was probably 10 when they laid it out. They were like, you can mow the lawn weekly for a fixed amount of money, whatever it was in the old house, like $10. Little self-propelled push mower. And then I remember moving to the bigger house and having the tractor. Dad gave me like $20 a week to mow the lawn. And I felt like that was a good deal back then, 1987 and onward, right? But it turned out with skateboarding and video games and everything, it wasn't really enough. So I remember trying various things. Like you may not remember this because you were so little, but I was a paper boy for a very brief period of time. But I didn't deliver door to door on my bike. Mom and Dad helped me, and we had bundles of papers in the back of the station wagon. And we would have to take them, bag them up. That was like a prep type thing, and then go out early in the morning and then stuff them in the mailbox of the people that subscribed to said paper. I don't even remember what it was. It was probably Newsday, Long Island Newsday. And dude, I got the smell of the newspapers in the car at like 4:30, 5:30 in the morning got me so sick. Like I had like a really adverse reaction to the smell of the papers for some reason. So that job lasted less than a month. I may have gotten physically ill a couple of times. Like I would just get so sick. Part of it was probably waking up so early in the morning. I was 9 or 10 at the time, probably. I was really young. So that didn't work out. And then my funniest blue collar employment memory when, you're officially on the United States Treasury's books and you're getting taxes taken out and all that thing. I would go to Dad on certain moonlighting gigs. Like our dad always took side jobs. And one of the things he did was carpentry. He's like a master woodworker, our dad, right? So he would go out, and a lot of the other firefighters moonlit too. So they would kind of crew up and they would go out and build somebody's deck, a friend of a friend or a fellow firefighter's deck or something like that. Dad did chimney sweeping. He did all types of projects. Mostly it seemed to be in the area of carpentry, and he would take me on these jobs. And that's when I think, he was trying to plant a seed, like, let me introduce you to tools, how to build something, how to measure and cut. Here's what we do. Here's how we put things together with nails or wood screws or whatever, just like the basics of being handy. And I couldn't be less interested. Like I found out just fantasizing about like, when do we go to 7-Eleven for the buttered roll and the Gatorade? Like I couldn't,
exactly.
Like if I had a watch, that's what I would have been doing.
Dude, what was with the buttered roll? That was like the buy off. It was like amazing how easy it was.
That was the only reason I think I went along for lunch, And I remember like him having to like make up work for me because it just wasn't, the things he was trying to instill just weren't catching on. So he would I would be pushing the broom, like digging, clean up the sawdust. Like it was like a whole nother job for him to try to keep me busy. And it became more of me being a burden than being helpful. And that's when I realized like, all right, whatever Dad has, whatever skills he has, whatever interest he has, whatever work ethic he has, it's just not, it hasn't rubbed off via osmosis with me. Like I was just you realize like you're your dad's son, but you could be completely different. And as I got older, the same thing. Like I just wasn't interested. Like I was just fantasizing about the next toy I was going to buy, or Star Wars or G.I. Joe, whatever I was into at the time, playing with my friends, whatever it was. So that was really, and that might have been Dad's part of his frustration too, with kind of pushing me out of the nest and being like, once you're 16, you're working a part-time job, you could work up to 30 hours or whatever was legally allowed at that time. And, but that was sort of my employment adventure up to my first real, quote unquote, real job. Those are the only things I could really think of. And it was interesting too, because Mom and Dad were not, I always say this to Helene and she can't believe this. Like they weren't big on making us do chores and stuff like that. Like we were very lucky in retrospect. They weren't really pushing their, like, you need to earn your keep agenda. Like we were allowed to be kids, but there was a very marked line of demarcation where it was like, turn 16, you're going to work. Like, I don't care how hard high school is, how much homework you have, how much studying, extracurricular activities, sports, doesn't matter. You're working. So that was it was a wake up call for me at 16 because I never had to do anything. I never had to do shit. I think even if I missed the lawn, Dad would be like, I'll do it, type of thing. Save me $20 type of a deal. So
yeah. It's interesting. I had the same experience with Dad, just in the sense of like, this isn't happening. I feel bad for Dad in hindsight, because I'm sure he would have preferred sons that
were more useful,
you know? But we were like so into, he probably looked at us and they're like, what the hell is up with these kids? Like,
are these my children?
Obsessed with cartoons and toys and video games, and it's just like
at birth.
It's so strange. And I've always felt bad about that, because Dad used to bring me on some jobs too, but the only one I really remember is one where I locked him out of his truck and he had to get the guy to drive him back to our house and then like climb through a window in Dana's room or something to like get inside to get the key. I remember it so well, because it was just like, oh no, what did you do? All because I just like locked the truck on mistake or whatever. And Dad used to bring me, actually, I think in 9th grade when we moved back to Long Island, Dad used to work for his friend. I don't remember the guy's name. I don't know if you remember. He owned like a lawn mowing store, like a lawnmower store. You know what I'm talking about? Dad and him were really close, and then they had like some sort of major falling out. I don't know like what. And Dad like doesn't even speak of his name anymore. I don't know. But anyway, he used to bring me to that, and I would make like $20 a day, just like cleaning up the shop and doing all that kind of stuff. But you would do whatever, mowing lawns.
Sure. I
have a very specific memory of asking Dad if I could mow the lawn in exchange for a TIE fighter. That must have been in like 1995 or 1996. And he was like, yeah, all right. So I mowed the entire lawn in exchange for that. So I was always willing to do a task. And it always bothered me, because especially Allie and Dana were always like, Colin was so spoiled and this and that. And I'm like, I really wasn't. Like, I really, honest to God, wasn't. You know, I got every Star Wars toy by trying to do something, or like trying to earn money, saving money, doing all these things, G.I. Joes, video games. I remember even having like separate piggy bank kind of things so I can like save my money in strategic ways. So it's like this. I remember having a fund for an AT-AT. I remember having a fund for all sorts of different things. And like
you saved. Wow.
Yeah, you just put money. But you know, it's like, I want an AT-AT, but I'm not going to save until I have the $75. So I'm just going to put a few dollars at a time away and then use the rest of it elsewhere. And that's just the way I operated. So it's funny you say that, but I also had a brief stint as a paper boy in 8th grade when I lived in New Hampshire. That was, what was that paper called? God, I can't even remember anymore. It's something weird. The Something Daily Democrat was the name of it. The Something Daily Democrat was what it was called. But I got into it because my friend Chad at the time delivered, but then he went away for like the summer, and I like adopted his paper route, and it's really tough. I used to have to bike around his like streets and like deliver them by hand or whatever. And you have to put them together. Like you were saying, yeah. I don't know if it was the same, but like, and I remember that even at the deli, which I will talk about more deeply, we would get the New York Sunday Times and the Newsday Sunday edition stuff. And they actually all came separate, and you have to put them together. And I remember the first time I did that, the woman was like, you should wear, latex gloves. And I'm like, no, it'll be fine. She's like, all right. And then I put them all together and my hands were black at the end. I'm like, I didn't have any idea that this is how much you get on your hands when you're just dealing with newspapers. So it's funny that scratched something in me. But all right, let's get into the real jobs. I don't actually know the answer to this. What was like the first thing you did that you would say was like a real sort of job for you?
Yeah, this is so my first employment adventure of yesteryear, where it was like a big official thing, was our dad, right? He was a New York City firefighter dating back to the 70s, but he had sort of this other life. He had this sort of secondary career. I never really talked to Dad about it too deeply, and I'm not sure if the plan was to have a fallback or something he was even considering when he, back before the firefighter years when he was an iron worker in New York. But he was involved in a supermarket chain on Long Island that a lot of people will remember. Defunct since 2015, I think, but a supermarket chain called Woolbaum's, which was a Northeast supermarket chain, a big supermarket, a chain dating back to the early 1900s that Dad worked in the produce department dating back to the 70s, maybe even the late 60s, and became eventually a produce manager at one of the stores, the one in Garden City, actually, on Long Island. And so he had and Dad stayed at Woolbaum's on a part-time basis through the 70s and 80s, maybe even into the early 90s, as a side job. So even when he was working, commuting back and forth to Brooklyn, and he was officially a New York City firefighter, and maybe even after he made lieutenant, he kept that side job at Woolbaum's. And so he had a lot of connections all over the island into this company. Like he knew the produce managers, he knew the store managers, he knew the corporate dudes and the corporate women. So he thought, I guess it was a big idea, a good idea. I was already kind of juiced in, like, I'm going to get Dagan a job at Woolbounds, at our local Woolbounds in East Patchogue in the produce department. And he knew a guy named Artie who was like a big corporate, big shot for the company at that point, that dated back with Dad to the 70s, that worked in the produce department with Dad at one time. And he was a big corporate dude now. And this guy Artie kind of got me in there. I don't think I even had a job interview, and it was just like 24 to 30 hours. It was minimum wage. I mean, it was probably at that time, we're talking about 1989, maybe into 1990, maybe high fours, low five, $5.10 an hour or something. And Dad was really insistent on that, because I remember thinking, like, I'm already kind of struggling with high school. Like, I don't want to do the work. I'm trying to skate by with not doing a lot. Like, I wasn't applying myself in high school at all. But now it's going to be tough because, 4 or 5 nights a week plus a weekend day or two, I'm going to be working. And I remember being kind of concerned about that. Like, I'm barely making it happen right now at school. But Dad was like, you're going to work. Like, Mom was probably on the same page too, but Dad especially was like, this is it. Like, you're working. There's no questions asked. There's no debate. And so I started there. And you know what? It was interesting, Kyle, because thinking back, it was really, it was my first exposure to manual labor and a blue collar workforce. So I met all these guys. Some kids were my age, but a lot of them were college age and older. Some of these guys were career supermarket dudes that were already in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And it was backbreaking work. I mean, you're lifting 40-pound apple boxes, 50-pound sacks of potatoes, and it's constant. You're stocking the shelves. And a lot of it's also warehouse work, right? So you're in the back, you're crushing garbage in the compactor or baling cardboard boxes in the baler, and you're dealing with, shipments, right? So trucks come in full of produce, you're unloading the produce, and you got pallet jacks, and it's heavy work, hard work. But you know what? I kind of found myself applying myself. I think the idea with me was I didn't want to be there, but in order to make the time go fast, I just worked really hard, and the time would fly. I mean, that clock would spin. And I worked for a real taskmaster. I remember my first produce manager was this guy, Frank. And he was tough. And I think Dad and him knew each other from days back at a certain store. Maybe they worked in Huntington together or something. And he was the type of dude that was, he would make you work. He didn't care if you were a kid, like you were in charge. And I would work night shifts. So most of those guys, most of the full-timers, whether they were managers or assistant managers or just full-time dudes, the floral girl, like they all had to be off the clock at a certain time. So we would be, a kid or two, or maybe there'd be 3 of us in the produce department at night. We were there. We were covering the shift from 5 to 9 or from 6 to 10 or whatever. It was our job to do everything. And if the things weren't done, they would know the next day. So it was stocking the shelves, doing the prep work, tray packing the corn, slicing the watermelon, prepping the greens in the back. And I remember it being really hard work. And then you get a check at the end of the week and it would be like $117 or something for all that work once taxes were taken out and everything. But, it kind of, in retrospect, it paid for my lifestyle, right? I was able to buy skate stuff, video game and movie rentals. It kind of greased the wheels for my fast food habit, right? Or, going to the mall and paying for the arcade and the food court. Like, I didn't save money. I was so bad with saving. I just spent completely hedonist. If I made $400 a month or something, it was all gone. But I guess the idea was, Mom and Dad were trying to instill some sort of work ethic, and also like, it's time to grow up. You got to pay for your own stuff. You know what I mean? You want a pair of skate shoes. You can make holes in these shoes every month. You're going to go out and buy them, and that was nice. That was nice to have. I remember it being really kind of a nice thing to have my own loot and be able to pay for my own things without having to wait for Mom and Dad or do a chore or beg or have to wait a certain amount of time or rely on, lean on Grandma and Grandpa. But that was the big thing with this job. And also I had this job, I was 16. So we're probably talking 1989 to 1990. And I kept this job at Woolbaum's until I left for college in early 94. So I was there for the better part of 4 years. And I think it taught me a lot about sort of work ethic. And I think it made me realize too, like I would be around this family of guys that I loved, you know, some of the older dudes and everything like that. But I saw how hard they worked for how little they made. And I think it kind of opened up my eyes to the way the world works. You know, a lot of these guys weren't, you know, some of them may they've not even graduated high school. Most of them didn't have college educations. So these guys were really kind of breaking their backs for minimum returns. And I think that planted something in me too, you know, along with grandpa always telling me like, don't waste your talent, like make sure you go to art school, you know, don't get sucked into that blue collar world because there's nothing wrong with it. But if you have a talent, don't squander that. So I think, you know, a lot of that was at play starting at 16 years old and sort of me developing into a young man and not being a kid anymore and just maturing. But, you know, I also remember the fun memories. I mean, we would be in the back room when the managers left, throwing eggplants at each other and, you know, slicing them with like, all right, you throw the eggplants and I'm going to slice them with a knife like a ninja. We had the giant watermelon machetes and stuff like that. So many fun memories. And that's also where I met PJ. You know, he used to come in to shop with his parents. And I think we kind of identified, you know, we looked at each other like he has the skate shoes on, he has the skate shoes on, you know, type of thing, like identify each other as skateboarders and stuff. So that was an interesting period of my life where, you know, I learned what working hard for your dollar meant, you know.
Certainly, dude.
I wonder if kids too, like, I wonder if they're pushed that hard these days or if there's a little more political correctness because they expected a lot out of a 16-year-old, like, you know, bleaching the floors and lifting these giant, enormous crates and cartons and bushels and operating electric pallet jacks and stuff. Like we weren't licensed to do that kind of warehouse work.
No, dude, totally. I mean, at least when I'll talk about my deli job, which was similar in the sense that like, no, there were no rules. So at least 20 years ago, there were still no rules. I don't know. I don't know if it was like that, you know, if it's still like that today, but it's funny you say all that because when I think back, I'm like, I can't believe they used to let us do the things.
You would think it would be better now, but I'm not sure.
Like I was legally not allowed to use the slicer, but I was using it all the time. You know, like it seemed like no one gave a shit for some reason. That's funny. That's interesting because, what you say, what you're talking about with the blue collar guys and stuff, that scratches something in me later. I'll talk about too. But I remember you working at Woolbaum's. I have really specific memories of it actually, because I remember Mom and I used to go in and we would see you sometimes. But I don't know if you were friendly with the bakery people, or like what. But I used to get a free cookie when I would go in there. Do you know what I'm talking about? You know the so people know I'm not really a sweets guy, but there's like these very specific exceptions. Like I don't like chocolate at all, except for like very specific, I guess, fudge type cookies. And if you're in New York or in Italian places, you guys know like the leaf cookies that are like green or reddish or pinkish, and they're two cookies and then there's just chocolate in between them, and like an Italian style cookie. And I used to just get one every time I'd go into Woolbaum's.
Those are so good. I remember her. I remember the bakery. Yeah, I was friendly with two of them. One of the guys was like a big comic book head, and we used to argue about Rob Liefeld and Image and everything like that. And then the woman, dude, I haven't thought of her in 25 years. It's so funny that you bring that up. Yeah, it becomes a family. Even when you're working somewhere part-time, you know, it's like, I have fond memories of those days.
Totally. I totally hear you. R.I.P. Woolbaum's. Yeah, it's that Woolbaum's in Patchogue is like a seminal location of many events. Yeah. Okay. For me, so I would consider my first real job a spring and summer spent in, I guess it was 1999 at a stable, the South Haven Stables on Long Island. My friend Corey's mom has some sort of ownership stake at these stables and they have their horses kept there. And so we kind of finagled this with her where it was like me, Cody. So like a cast of characters. I mean, it was awesome. It was like me, Cody, Mike Pope, Corey, and maybe that was it. and our friend Kevin, maybe, who none of us have seen since high school. None of us have seen him or heard from him. This guy, Kevin.
Oh, no.
And he comes up every once in a while. Every time I see or talk to them, I'm like, have you seen or heard from Kevin? And they're like, no. And I'm like, that's so weird. He just disappeared. But we worked at this stable, and the mom would pay us out of petty cash or probably something, $25 a day. Plus she would go get us like Burger King or, deli sandwiches or something like that. And it was fun. It was like, I've actually fondly looked back at it because my whole job was just, coming there for a few hours, and it was like a stable with a huge corridor down the middle, horses on either side. And then there was always one empty stable. And so you would take one horse, put it in the empty stable, clean that horse's thing, then put the horse back in the stable, then bring, another horse into the empty place, clean their thing, like replace the hay. It was constantly going back and forth with wheelbarrows and dumping shit, literally. And then there were a few horses. This is what I remember too. There were a few horses where it's like, you can't be with them because either they're like too expensive or they're too temperamental. So like other people deal with those horses. You don't worry about them. You're really dealing with like our shitty horses that we like rent out, or like people that don't pay very much to stable their horses or whatever. So that was fun. I remember there were like these two sisters that worked there that we all like had crushes on. They were really flirty with us. We used to go riding afterwards. We would just take the horses that we liked. I liked this horse Diamondback a lot. I call him Dimebag.
I was going to ask you if you rode.
I did. I rode all the time. And yeah, so me and Dimebag used to go out onto the trails, and I remember very well. I still have the shirt. Actually, it's funny. I have an Autobot shirt, and the horse that I was riding like took me into a tree branch.
Oh,
and you have to, horses are finely controlled. You really have to learn how to do it. And so I ducked down onto the horse's thing, and the branch went over me, but took my shirt and like ripped it.
Oh shit.
And I still have it like as a memory, which is funny as hell.
John Wayne'd it.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, he was just we were just trotting. It wasn't like I rarely got the horse, although it happened into a gallop. That is insanity, dude. When you get like the way you're riding, it's like you're riding this beat. It was incredible. It's scary.
I'd be terrified. You're so high off the ground.
It's much smooth. They say it's much smoother to go faster though, than the trot, where you're like, your body's just like,
yeah, sure,
moving all over the place. So yeah, that was my first job that I would consider like a job. Although I remember it was really just Corey getting us, like all of us hanging out at his mom's expense, basically. So that was fun. I remember that. But then my first real job, to what you're saying, it was at Swan Deli. Now I don't think Swan Deli exists anymore, but Swan Deli in Patchogue, I worked there from 2000 to 2002. And it was owned by this woman, Kathy. She was really nice, Italian family, and paid under the table. Everyone was paid under the table, I think, except for like two people. And, they would take the meat paper and just like rip a piece of the paper off and put it on the table and put like a grid down and then put everyone's names on it and then write the hours on it that way and then just like tape it to the wall.
I love it. And
I really loved working at this place. I thought it was fun, and it was an interesting glimpse, not as much as my landscaping job, which I'll talk about later, but it was a glimpse into the adult world and like what people do for a living if you don't go to college or if you don't have a trade or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there was a couple older women that worked at the counters. One of them, Nora, really loved me. She used to pick me up for work, and she was a real sweetheart. And then there were these two older guys, like in their 20s, Jim and Dave. They used to call me guy all the time. Remember how mad I used to get when I started using that term, because they used to be like, all right, what's going on, guy? That kind of thing. And Dave used to call me Chad instead of Colin. He would never call me Colin. He used to always call me Chad.
Why?
I don't know. He just thought it was funny to call me Chad. These guys were just so weird. There's another guy named Mike, who actually passed away when I was working there. But it was, I would work some weekdays after school, and that's like, 3 to 7 or whatever. And you're closing and you're banging out the rugs and you're wiping down things and stuff. But then I would typically work always Saturdays and Sundays, which is, in hindsight, it's like, damn, I had no fucking life at all. But I would work Saturday something like 7 to 5 or something like that. And then I would work Sunday like 10 to 6 or something stupid like that. I was like, what was I doing? And I would be making mostly egg sandwiches during that time, depending on, so I was like really good at the griddle, and they trusted me with it for some reason. And I just eventually just took that over. I don't know why that happened or how that happened. We had another woman. She was like this old gay woman. Her name was Charlene. She was really great, but she would just disappear because I was like, she's like, all right, I'm gonna go do something or whatever. I'd be like, all right, and then she'd leave for like 3 hours. And so I'd be making the egg sandwiches, making the French toast and the pancakes and doing all that. And I remember there was like a bell. It was like a black bell that hung to let people know that something was ready so they can come get it and give it to the person. So you'd always hit it with the spatula, bing, you're making bing.
That's huge.
With the spatula, yeah. Because like there was a little thing you rang, but I like that was, I just like hitting it. So I just would hit it with the spatula. That's like a huge memory of mine. An insane amount of eggs and bacon we would go through. Like, dude, hundreds of eggs, more than 1,000 probably. Like, how they used to come in boxes and then they would come in the crates on top of the crate.
Yeah.
And we would just go through those like mad. And then we would make our bacon in huge cookie sheets. And we'd have these boxes of bacon, and then you would just put them in the oven. They were just constantly rotating in and out of the oven, and you would just turn around to this oven and just take like pieces of bacon for your sandwich. It was all like legit in terms of its quality. It was actually quite fun to do. The French toast was awesome. I don't know if you remember going there. You and I used to go there sometimes when I was off, and then they would just give us absurd amounts of food for like, and it'd be like $5. The old woman Nora, she'd be like, all right, $5. I'd be like. And it was like just literally food for everyone, at home. I have really fond memories of that. They were really sweet. And then, of course, like you say, like breaking down boxes and stocking some shelves, stocking milk, cleaning the milk. You have to take all the milk out of the case and clean. For some reason, milk is just gross. Like things are always breaking. And then there were some funny things too, like going into the walk-in fridge and freezer. And I'd have to clean that every week, but you have to keep it closed. So you'd have like bleach. It was like 10 degrees. You'd have like bleach and you'd just be like dying in this place. You'd be freezing and you couldn't breathe. You're breathing noxious fumes. Just absolutely no rules at all. They would always have me jump into the dumpster to squash down the garbage. So they would put like a bunch of like squash cardboard boxes down. And then I would basically like body slam it, and like jump all over it to smush it down. It was, cleaning the bathrooms and putting the newspapers together, like I said. And, some boxes you break down and destroy. The bread boxes and the egg boxes you break down and put aside. Those companies come back and take them back and shit. It's like, all these things I like remember. And it's so interesting. I actually didn't really mind working there. I made $6 an hour off the books and never made more than that. The woman was really nice, though. For like holidays, she would give us like $50 in scratch off tickets, which she probably fell off the back of a truck or something.
Really
who knows?
Cute. Yeah, right.
And then I remember, when I broke my shoulder right before 9/11, I couldn't work for a few months, and then I didn't work there very much after that. In fact, I remember her asking me at a time, like, she's like, "Do you still work here?" Yeah, and I'm like, because I've saved up quite a bit of money. I think I saved up like $700 before I got hurt or something like that. And when you're 16, you're like, dude, I can live on this for a year. I don't need you. Yeah. And that was, and which is insane when you think about it. And I did make that money last like all senior year. You take little things like Metal Gear Solid 2. Okay, I'm going to get that. Get a little bit of money in for birthdays and Christmas and all of that. The way you manage that cash. And what you were saying earlier really resonated with me too, because I just used to waste so much money. I would have had so much money if I just bought the things that I truly cared about. It's like, what was I bought thousands of dollars in hockey cards when I was a kid, which I just gave away a few months ago to a listener, actually, because they're not really worth anything.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like, he's like, they might be worth like a few $100s. And I'm like, you can just have them. I just don't want them in my fucking garage anymore. So that's that I would say that the stables / deli experience was my high school. Those were my high school jobs. And so I kick it back over to you, Dig. I wonder I think that's all for high school for you too. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, there was actually a couple of offshoots for me for high school, but I got to shout out to Swan Deli because they really had delicious food, delicious breakfast food. Their egg sandwiches were an institution. And I don't know if you know this, Kyle, but the Swan, the Swan thing in Patchogue was like Swan Cleaners. They had Swan Stationery. Then they had the deli. They might have had a pizzeria.
Bakery.
The bakery. That's right. Was that all Kathy? Did she own all of those?
No, I think that as I understand it, they were all originally owned by the same family or company and eventually spun them off.
Oh, to different
I think that's
owners.
where like Les's Pizza came from.
Les's, that's right.
Swan Bakery, I think, was like owned by someone else. We used to go borrow money from them sometimes. So I think there was like some sort of stake in there. Okay. And I remember going in there too because like all the cute older girls worked in the bakery. you know, so like he would go in there and ask for money, and it would, I smell like fucking hash browns, and I got my blue apron on that looks like I fucking came on it because it's got pancake batter on it.
Yeah, you must have reeked of the bacon smell, right?
Oh my God, I smelled like shit when I would work at this place. I mean, I guess I smelled not shit, but I remember my friend Cody used to come pick me up sometimes, and he's like, "Dude, you just reek."
It gets into your pores, your hair.
I'm standing over this thing like eggs and bacon just splashing into your face. You know, I'm literally peeling 200 potatoes for potato salad or something like that. You know. Then I'm over the cheese slicer,
dude, that's
getting some Swiss cheese going or something like that, you know. The slicer thing was the funniest because I had no business.
Oh man,
it evolved. Like at first they would take the slicer apart so I can clean it.
Okay.
Then they were like, "Can you put the slicer back together?" It's like, okay, and then it's like, "Can you start slicing some food?" some. It was very funny.
That was your training, bit by bit.
Yeah, I liked that job. I think my breaking my shoulder just interrupted the whole cadence there. Right. I should point out too, my friend Anthony DeMeo got me the job there. Anthony, of course, is the younger brother of Allie's best friend, Janine.
Right.
And he was a year younger than me and worked there, but was my boss. And it was so funny because he's a real blue collar, hardworking dude. That cat, I love that cat. He's a good guy.
He's a year younger than you. Okay. I thought he was a year older than you. Okay.
No, he's a year younger. And then their brother, that's Michael, right, is 3 years older than me because he used to drive me to school when I was in 9th grade and he was in 12th grade.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Okay. So, let's move on to you, Dag. What else do you have to say? Where do you take it?
All right. So this is a little offshoot that I had, a little pleasant offshoot that I had in high school and then late into high school. Maybe it kind of extended just into my in between high school and college time period to that era. But I got to work at a skate shop for a little while, which was so cool. Of course, by this time I was an avid skateboarder in high school.
Was that alienation?
It became, but it used to be called DVs.
Okay.
And we called it bills. So interestingly enough, and a little bit of Long Island skate history, Long Island never really had or always had very few core skate shops for such a big geographic area. Not a big skateboard presence, oddly enough, for such a huge suburb. But there was a skate shop that we kind of got hip to pretty early on. It probably opened not too long after I started skateboarding in the later 80s. But it was called DV's, and it was in Smithtown, which was pretty considerably far from us. We were on Eastern Long Island. This was in the center of the island in a place called Smithtown. And this guy named Bill ran this shop. And what stood out about DV's is I was the first, for a lot of us, it was the first core skate shop. They just did skate. So we had other shops that had skateboard equipment for us. We had Bungers in Sayville, which was surf and skate. We had Danny's Ride Away in Nassau County, which was cycling, BMX, and skate. Eventually, we would have New School, which was snow and skate. But Bill's
New School is where I first jumped in, by the way.
New School probably came in the mid-'90s, I would say. Maybe 93, maybe 94. But Bill was the first kind of core skate shop on Long Island that we remembered. Special Sauce in Bayshore would eventually become another core skate shop that just did skate. But Bill kind of had the market cornered for a while. And we would have to drive out and get our stuff from Bill because this was before CCS and mail order even jumped off. Of course, we didn't have the internet then. So our parents would drive us out, either mom or dad, or PJ's parents would drive us out to Bill's every month or whatever. And we'd go and get boards and some apparel and get new trucks, new wheels, whatever. And over time, we got friendly. Bill was an older dude. Eventually, when he folded the shops, he would go on and manage like the Vans outlet in Bellport. But I don't even know what the guy. You're young, so you're not really tripping too much. Like I don't even know what his origins of skateboarding were, to be honest. But him and his wife ran the shop, and over time, we got friendly with him. Mom and dad got friendly with Bill. He was a really nice guy, very genial, very friendly all the time. And he got to know me and PJ, and he got to know his Mrs. Peach and dad specifically. And he had this little shop in Smithtown. And after a while, I think with us pressing him a little bit, I got like this glorified shop sponsorship through Bill. He was like, yeah, you could ride for the shop. Just like, I'll give you a board a month, whatever the deal was. And like, you just rock the Bills t-shirt when you're skating around. Or there weren't even contests back then. Like there was like one contest at the Brooklyn Banks every year. So it wasn't even a thing. It was just, he was just being nice, and, you know, Dagan could skate for me or whatever. And then I think he really quickly realized like he should get a little bit more return for his investment. So he was like, why don't you just work at the shop a day or two a week? And I think he kind of knew in the back of his mind that I was going to be spending 3/4 of my pay in there anyway on shit. So it kind of worked out for him. So I got this job, this weekend job at Bill's, sort of manning the shop. And the thing is, talking about feeling bad for mom and dad, like they would have to drive me to Smithtown and pick me up. So if I worked there all day on a Saturday, this was like 30 miles away, right? So they were really good about that kind of stuff. So, and I, you know, again, he wasn't trying to let me work there every day. And of course I had school, so it wasn't really going to work out. So maybe I'd work one Saturday a week, had to keep the job at the supermarket as well. They probably weren't too thrilled because Saturday was a big day for the part-timers, right? You could work full days and stuff like that, kind of give them a little relief, spell them a little bit. But it was really fun. I mean, it was like a dream come true working at the skate shop, because it's exactly what you want to immerse yourself in, right? That was my bread and butter. That was my end-all, be-all. Read magazines, watch skate videos, help the little grommets in, pick boards for them, match trucks and wheels to their boards, grip a board for a little kid, show them how it's done. The older kids would come in. I would make new friends with skaters my age from other places, Long Island, that I wouldn't have met otherwise. And then, of course, my friends would come in. But again, the hard part of this, Kyle, was that I didn't have a driver's license for any of this. So I didn't think I got my proper license till I was like 19. So all of my employment hinged on mom and dad getting me to these places. But then also, dad worked so much that I often had to ride my bike to the supermarket. But he was fully on the hook for getting to Smithtown because it was so far away, you know. But I remember really enjoying my time there. I really dug it. I think Bill and his wife liked it because they could actually leave the shop on a Saturday and go run errands and do other things. And I could stay there for 3 or 4 hours at a time and manage it on my own. You know, I would work the register, grip a board, maybe receive a little inventory, deal with UPS. And it was fun, man. I just got, you know, I think I even did a little bit of ordering, like, oh, what wheels should I get and what diameter and what brands? And, you know, I could push my agenda for World Industries or Reel, whatever I was into at the time, Spitfire. And it was awesome. I would have loved to. And later on, it would play into my experience working at Sub-Zero in Philly during my college years. And I actually managed Sub-Zero and managed the team for a little while too, Declaration. But so that was kind of a nice foray into the business side of skateboarding a little bit. And I just ate it up, dude. I remember myself, you know, daydreaming at that time. Like, I wish I could just do this. And I have to go sling eggplant and romaine and all that kind of stuff.
Totally.
At the supermarket. But you know, one thing I missed that Woolbams did have that Bill's didn't have was that camaraderie. I mean, I have to shout out to the dudes. Like, I worked with older guys at the supermarket. There were all types, right? Like, I remember this one dude, Vinny. He was probably in his 30s at the time. He was a full-timer, but he was really unreliable. And everybody kind of resented him for that. He would spend like 4 hours of his 8-hour shift in the bathroom, like holed up with a magazine. So there was those dudes that were just not good just didn't have the work ethic and were just, you know, not feeling it. But I worked with dudes older guys that were comedic geniuses.
Totally.
I mean, we talk about this on Long Island. Like, I feel like in retrospect, these guys could have like wrote for Conan. Or certainly been like cast members on Opie and Anthony or something. Like, so naturally gifted at comedy and timing, whether it was just lampooning or making fun of customers behind their back or playing pranks on each other. Like, these guys just had a real talent for humor. And it was amazing at that time, being 16, 17, 18 years old, because they provided the day's entertainment. But in retrospect, looking back, it was like these guys could have had careers doing this. Especially now with the advent of YouTube, they could have just started their own things. Just brought that brand of comedy, that wit that they had. You know, they were a lot of these guys never even dabbled at, or dipped their toe in the college waters, but they were so smart. I mean, they were geniuses. They never failed to make you like roll on the floor laughing. And it, you know, also in retrospect, it could have been their therapy, you know, that it was a cathartic thing. Like they were doing this 9-to-5 job. A lot of them, you know, they would complain about their lives or their lot in life or their wives and, you know, just the amount of money that they made and stuff. But, you know, they kind of put the Band-Aid was the humor, you know, and them kind of putting a pleasant face on the life they had to lead, you know, that they weren't really feeling it, but it was like a way for them to make the best of it.
Totally.
But
dude,
I wonder now with the advent of like just doing things on your own, like what these guys could have they could have been recognized and made livings doing this. I feel like, and we grew up, you know, you probably met guys like that at the deli. It's the same thing. Like, they just have a talent, a wit. They were quick. There was an intelligence there, a timing, all of that, you know?
Dude, it was what you're saying to me really resonates and brings me into my next story so perfectly because I hear what you're saying because it reminds me of the landscapers I worked with. And so when I went to Northeastern, I was already freelancing for IGN. I won't go down that road. I mean, I think everyone knows that story already. I wrote for IGN for 5 years before they hired me, and I wrote at GameFAQs, and that was the background radiation of my life. And I'm really pleased to have been able to do that. However, I had a real job, and I actually was making quite a bit of money in college when you think about it, because I did work both of these jobs. So I'd get like $2,000 a month from IGN plus whatever I was getting from this landscaping gig. And of course, I would spend literally all of it on marijuana and beer. So and pizza. I mean, none of that. There was no money left. Trust me. But the landscapers I worked with. So mom hooked me up with, and, you know, God bless mom. I mean, mom worked at Northeastern. She taught there and was an administrator there and all the rest. So she knew a lot of people there, and she knew this guy, Chuck. And Chuck was the landscape designer of Northeastern. Like he was, you know, Northeastern's a big private university. So they have a dude that's just in charge of like monitoring the landscaping, and it's like award-winning landscaping, and they're really into it and all this. So he's this really nice guy, and they run this really, it's funny. So I meet this guy, and it's in fall 2002, and I go meet him. Mom introduces me to him. He hires me, you know, shakes my hand, sends me out, and I meet these dudes. Right. So like you have this guy in like a suit and tie. He's really nice, real buttoned up and all that. But then you go out and meet these guys, and these are just massholes. Right. And they were the greatest. These guys were, well, to your point, like they were some of the funniest and most ridiculous people I had ever encountered in my entire life. And they were all really nice, and they all really liked me. And I thought that, I think maybe similar to you, you want these people to like you. You don't want that fake affection, and they really did like me. And I think what was interesting was they were skeptical of me at first because of mom. And what you learn when I came to learn about them is that it's like deeply inappropriate, you know, like they work really hard, but it's funny, you know, and it's like they just thought I was like a mole. And when they realized that I was actually one of them and that I loved it, and I just thought they were the funniest people ever, it all clicked like before very long. And it was just a bunch of different characters, some young guys, some older guys. You know, we would just mow lawns and plant bulbs and do all this kind of stuff. But there's just so many funny stories to tell about those guys. And I think about them all the time. Like I would love to go back and see, I'm sure a few of them probably still work there. They were unionized. They all made quite good money. So I don't think it was, and they were all like always chasing overtime. They were making, I think some of those guys were easily making 6 figures. So it wasn't like a job where they were like, woe is me. But it was just, they were just fucking hysterical. If you think about old Italian men in Boston, you know, like the mass hole or the mass holes in the bleachers, well, not the bleachers, but the cheap seats at Fenway Park, or those kinds of guys, like those were the guys I was working with. And they had this guy with earrings and a Yankee hat on, right? Because I always used to wear my Yankee hat every day. And they were like, who the fuck is this kid? And then and you know, for over the 3 years or so I worked with them, we just ended up becoming very close. And it was it was a fun job, but it was a hard job. It taught me it really taught me hard work. It also taught me to turn off this idea that I'm too good for anything. I've told the stories in the past. They would literally send me to snow piles and have me pick the garbage out of them every day. Like climb the snow piles at this hall, this street, these halls, because the snow's melting, and just pick any garbage you can. Do it every day until the snow pile's gone. And like that's what, and like little things like that. You'd walk around with your garbage barrel on wheels. You'd see people you were in class with. You have, you're all dirty and you have your broom and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, you just kind of got to put away your embarrassment. And then I quickly realized, I'm like, I'm not embarrassed by anything, And then before you knew it, I was driving that fucking golf cart around like 40 miles an hour, picking up garbages at all the different garbage cans around the, just get out of the thing, blasting music, take the garbage can off, take the garbage thing out of my pocket, replace it, throw it in the back, just drive really fast to the next one. It's funny how quickly you become comfortable in these things. And I thought that job as landscaping and groundskeeper was interesting enough that I remember when I first started doing it, I was like, I kind of just want to do this instead of being in college because you guys make so much money. I mean, and I remember them being like, you shouldn't do that. But I also remember that there were several part-timers that all went to college, and some of them, they would come and go, and a few of them they liked and a few of them they didn't. And it was good to be like amongst the ones that they clearly liked. And I'll just tell you about some of the characters. Like, and what I loved is that they all liked each other too. There was no like outs with anyone. There was this guy, Brian, who would just read scripture all like in a corner and eat his lunch and do all this kind of stuff. And everyone really liked him. He was really friendly, but he wasn't like really in the social group. But then you came to learn, like I would have lunch with him and he like apparently like cheated on his wife and got caught like in the moment and was like this crazy alcoholic. And then he like found God and it saved him and all this stuff. So he would just be all obsessed with that and just doing his thing and doing his tasks and all of that. And there was this old Italian man, Al Lancioni, who was amazing. And he was just a short Italian man. And he would always get dibs on like the machine. So you'd always see him in like he'd always get like the little street cleaning machine, and you'd always see him and he'd always be like honking the horn when he was going by. Cause like everyone else would have to like do the harder work. Or he would like bring it like really close to you. Like if you were like in a flower bed, he would like bring it like as close as possible to you and like go really slow around.
Breaking balls.
Yeah. That was
such an important part of this.
That was what it was all about with these guys, was just busting each other's balls. And Rosie, who was like the foreman, was just this Matt Roselle. He was just a really sweet man. He was always there. Like I had we used to make fun of him because he apparently had a wife and kid, but it's like, I don't know. I don't believe you because you're always here. Probably a lot like Dad during that time. So yeah, just a lot of, Dave and Alan, all these just different dudes that all had a different flavor. Huge Boston sports fans, used to rag on me all the time about the Yankees and the Jets. They used to, Al Lancioni used to call me a pirate because of my earrings. I remember when I got him, he's like, "You look like a pirate," and everyone started laughing. Yeah. And what was fun too was that we had, and I've said this I think in the past, we had an apartment. Like the landscaping crew had like an entire section of like one of old Northeastern's buildings where it was just our space. And one of it was like a place where you go with like actual couches, and people used to just go in there and sleep all day and like.
I remember you tell me about that.
Yeah, and it was just kind of like accepted where as long as everyone felt like everyone, to your point, like everyone kind of felt like everyone was doing what they needed to do. No one was really getting in trouble. You would kind of like look the other way. And so people used to just hole up in their cars and get stoned and like go to sleep. Russ was like one of the dudes that worked there, was like one of the foremen. And he was like, he actually got fired, I think, for smoking weed in his truck. But he used to just smoke weed every day, like in the parking garage. And that was like the first place I had to go every day with a garbage can. I'd walk around the parking garage and then walk around the parking lots and pick things up, people's bottles, and when they were having fucking ragers in the parking lot and all this shit. It was an interesting job. So that was my blue collar experience, and in addition to the deli, and in addition to mowing lawns and doing all that kind of stuff. But that was kind of like my college job in addition to freelancing. And there was a summer when my last summer living home at Long Island, 2005, in between sophomore and junior year. Actually, we were a 5-year school at Northeastern, so it was between sophomore and middle year. And I worked at Morrow Foundation, which is a land trust on Long Island. And one of my best friend, Mike Pope's mom, works at this place. So I did landscaping there for a summer too. And that was just an awesome gig because it was just beautiful, like estate. And it was my job to just kind of like keep it nice. And I like landscaping. Like I like being outside. It was something that I enjoyed doing. I guess that's like the manliest part of my makeup would be, yeah, I like doing yard work. Like I really like doing it and getting my hands dirty and making it nice and getting the edges right. And the grass is all green, fluffy, and the flowers look right and everything's trimmed. And I like doing that stuff. So I think it came from that doing that job, obviously, but then I was able to translate that into some post-Morrow stuff. And now I keep my yard pretty nice here in Virginia too. In fact, my neighbor across the street from me told me, he's like, I really admire how you take care of your yard. And I said,
that's the ultimate payoff.
Yeah. I was like, thank you. Cause I'm doing it specifically so you notice.
But to actually say something, to vocalize it, that's right. Sort of a neighborly appreciation.
Yeah. He's a real nice guy.
That's gold.
Yeah. Nice people around here. All right. That's so gold. That's kind of the makeup of it. Where do you go from here in your journey?
Well, I have one that bears mentioning, but I have to say, I love that job, the landscaping thing with you. I love the cast of characters. I love I really enjoy that sort of Fox and the Hound, this young Yankees fan living in the lands of Red Sox Nation, but being accepted and loved anyway. Like there's something really charming about like, what happens if you throw a New Yorker into the equation and how that could play out, how that could go really wrong, or like legitimate affection could blossom, and I throw a New Yorker into Good Will Hunting and what happens, type of thing. I love that. There's something really charming about that.
It was cool. They were friendly and they would try to, try to help me with girls and try to, give me advice. And it was just, they were sweet,
I absolutely love it.
It's too bad that I've not been able to keep in touch with them. It was like just before, the internet was around obviously, but it was like not social media. People weren't really keeping in touch like that.
Yeah, it was
smartphones. It was just different. You weren't texting with people. So
no,
I would be interested to know. I'm sad to say, I'm sure some of them passed away at this point and all that. So I'd really be interested to know what's going on with them because some of them are older and that was 20 years ago. So yeah, that's
yeah. But
so yeah, let's kick it over to you. Proceed.
Well, you know what? This is one that's really funny. I have such vivid memories of this, even though I did this job the least amount of any job. And it was something that I was able to take part in, but it wasn't a regular thing. It wasn't frequent enough or regular enough for me to make an actual consistent living off. And I don't know if I ever really talked to you about this before, Kyle, but I had a friend, Mike McCarthy. He was in Dana's grade, so he's a year younger than me. Great friend of mine. Grew up in Brookhaven, skateboarding, awesome surfer too. He and his brother, JJ. His dad, Mr. McCarthy, I forget his dad's actual name, but he was our Boy Scout troop master for years. But Mr. McCarthy, and they lived right on the other side of 25A of Montauk Highway in Brookhaven. And Mike had like a big 10-foot vert ramp at one point. And he was a good friend of mine, Mike, growing up. And his dad was a very successful real estate agent. So, and I think he dealt in sort of higher figure sales and sort of hoity-toity type, maybe even Hampton style things. But he also had a part of his business that were smaller Levitt style capes and stuff like that in not so desirable neighborhoods that he would go in, buy, and flip. And I think, maybe in Mastic or certain neighborhoods where he would go in, buy a house on the cheap, a little cape or something. Maybe it was a foreclosure, and he would gut it, renovate, and flip it. So he would, as we got a little older, he was able to lean on Mike and a couple of his friends and say, okay, look, I'm going to give you guys $100 a piece. I want you to go into this house. It was a foreclosure. We're going to flip it. You go in and you just gut it. We have a dumpster in the driveway. You just bring everything out. When I say gut it, these houses were foreclosed upon. So a lot of them were fully furnished, food in the fridge, food in the pantries. Of course, a lot of them were a mess. They were filthy. Just go in. Maybe he said wear a mask. And the idea was to bring everything out. Furniture, boxes, food, everything. Put it in the dumpster and clear the way for my guys because they're going to come in and they're going to start renovating, rebuilding, whatever. So the idea was literally take a baseball bat. And if you don't have a baseball bat, take a table leg, rip off a table leg, and just demolish everything. Just it was like clubbing anything that was not a wall. Like leave the walls intact. Cabinets have to come down. I don't care how they come down. Any kind of vanities, everything. Toilets had to get ripped out. All the plumbing, the fixtures, everything. Just leave the walls and the floors intact. And we would go into these places. They would have the key or maybe knock the door down or whatever. We would have a bat or literally like some sort of table leg and just go to town. It was the most therapeutic,
I bet,
cathartic. It was dude, it was crazy. I probably only did it like 6 times. We would be in there for maybe 3 or 4 hours tops. $100 bill each, right? So it was really quick money. It was like, holy shit, I worked 24 hours last week at Wool Bounce to make $100 type of thing. And so fun, but also really opened my eyes to, we grew up very middle class. We weren't rich by any means, but we also had, the prototypical Italian mom that cleaned the entire house every day, like made me realize there's a real difference to how some people lived and how you were lucky enough to grow up. And, we would go in, open the cabinet, a stream of roaches would come scuttling out. It was like that. There was mice everywhere and dead mice, and there was roaches. I mean, there were roaches in the fridge. I mean, some of these places were really, it was really like seeing like, wow, this is how some people live. This is how some people grow up. And not only that, of course, the house was foreclosed upon. So there's like an inherent tragedy and all that. And we weren't really dwelling on that. At that age, we were just having fun and making a quick buck. But in retrospect, it was like, wow, this is what Dad's talking about when he goes to East New York. He's in Brooklyn. He's in these impoverished neighborhoods. And, people that are living with sometimes no doors on their apartment, no windows, like they don't have electricity, they have very little to eat, all these things. And I think seeing that in the suburbs as a 15, 16, 17-year-old was really eye-opening for me. Again, it wasn't the type of job where I could leave Wool Bounce, but every so often, every month or so, Mr. McCarthy would say, look, I got this thing on Saturday. You want to head over to Shirley Wading River and do this house.
And fuck this house up, boys.
just like destroy this house. So many crazy memories of it, dude. Like, it was just fun. It was like, I can't believe there are people, like he had crews that did this full time. So whatever overflow he had, like if his demo crews were busy, he would kind of kick it over to us. It's like, I can't believe there's guys that make a living doing this. Like this is a literal dream job. And, shout out to him for even thinking of us, because that was my first dealing with or experience with quick money. It was like, wow, I feel like I didn't even earn this, that type of thing. From coming to like a paper boy, like that was like, oh my God, like I just made $17 for waking up at 4:30 in the morning to Wool Bounce making $5.15 an hour, or even in the skate shop, making the same thing, minimum wage, and then using it all, you don't even see it because you're just buying product. This was the first time it was like, whoa, this is a lot of money for what I just did. Especially back then, you're talking about $1990 or whatever.
Yeah, that's a lot of money now. That's a lot of money.
Super crazy. Yeah. So crazy. And you just think of how much he profited by flipping these houses back then too, and he was also a smart dude because, again, I think he had those higher volume, higher figure sales where he was dealing in, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars at that time. And then he had these little operations where he would flip too. So he left no stone unturned. He was involved in everything. If it was real estate, so just kind of admiring him for that too. Is like, yeah, he's got a kind of finger in every pie, which is kind of interesting. And he was able to pay, 3 of us $300 for 3 hours worth of work or whatever, because there was no skin off his back.
Yeah,
so
it was cheaper than hiring a demo company or whatever, So.
Yeah. And I think he had dudes, like he had full timers that did things, but whether it was construction crews or demo crews or whatever, but they were so busy. Again, he had so many things going on, and he was all over Long Island too. Like he didn't leave any any area, that he had a presence everywhere, it seemed like.
A ubiquity, as it were.
Yeah, yeah.
What else? Any other positions that you want to discuss? I can think of a couple. So
yeah, well, you know what you knew about my job. So what I always hated about work, and I'm sure you could speak to this too, Kyle. You're in high school. The night shifts weren't so bad because you're already waking up early. You're going to school. You're dealing with all that. It was like, all right, I'll work the 4 to 9. What's the difference? I'm already doing all these things I don't want to do, and then I'll look forward to my day off. But I always felt like the worst thing was Saturday or Sunday, the weekend shifts, especially the ones that were later in the day. So let's say you were working a 4 to 9 on a Saturday at the supermarket. You were like, that hung over your head the entire day. There was no worse feeling. It was like, you want to sleep in, then you have a few hours before you got to go to the store. You can't even do anything. By the time you get out, it's already 9, 10 o'clock at night. So there was nothing worse than that feeling of like having work hanging over your head on the weekend. So I skated with a bunch of dudes that I became very friendly with on the North Shore of Long Island. So about the same distance east as us, but on the North Shore rather than the South Shore. So Shoreham, Wading River, Miller Place, Rocky Point, there was a contingent of guys that, like Brian and Chris, who I grew up with, that became, some of my best friends. And we were always up there skating on the weekends. And all these dudes at one time or another, we kind of frequented this strip mall up there, which was like a Ross supermarket, a bowling alley, had a ice cream parlor, pizzeria. And in this strip mall where we hung out and skated was a bagel place. And they all worked there at one time or another, this bagel shop. And I was at Wilbaum's and I was kind of feeling the hours. And sometimes I was working like a smattering of hours spread out over the course of the entire week. So it was like I didn't even have a break, but I worked like 3-hour shifts, 7 days a week. It sucked. So I was like, I caught on. I was like, wait a second. They go into the bagel place. They got to get up early. They're in there like 5 o'clock in the morning, but they're out by 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. That sounds amazing. So I said, can I get a job at this place? Talked to the owner, Joan. She hired me. I didn't even talk to Dad about it because, again, this was like 30 miles from our house, 25, 30 miles away. So Dad was nice enough to say, okay, I'll drive you there in the mornings. I had to be there at like 5 in the morning, and he was nice enough to do it. Thank God it didn't last long for Dad's sake, right? So, and I'm like sick. Like I'll get out at 11. Not only will I be out early, I have the whole day ahead of me. I'm already where I want to be. We're going to skate there anyway. So perfect. Don't have a driver's license. Got to rely on Dad. This job bled into my time off between high school graduation and college too, because I took a little time off. I took a year off between. And I remember not telling Wilbaum's just to be probably the smartest thing I ever did as a kid, because I never did anything with any kind of wisdom. But I was like, I'm not going to tell Wilbaum's or leave or give my notice because I don't know how this job's going to go. So I had the foresight to at least not tell Wilbaum's or give my notice. So I get to this job. It's hard to get up early, but I'm psyched to get out and just go roll right into skating. I'm young. I'm energetic. I have the energy. And Dad's kind of hemming and hawing and belly aching about the drive, but he's into it. And also he had some leeway with picking me up because I said, I'll just go to Brian's or I'll skate for the day. You don't have to pick me up at 11, pick me up at, after dinner. It doesn't matter. I'm going to be there anyway. So I think that kind of made it a little easier on him. But the owner, this woman, Joan, was so mean. I'm just going to call her out by name. Joan Lipschitz.
Whoa.
Very,
perfect.
Very mean lady. Very hard to get along with. Kind of a taskmaster, but I was used to that at Wilbaum's already. Just nasty. Just like really kind of nasty. Just like I had a nasty temperament, not friendly. She never praised you for a job well done. One of those, And push came to shove. I was only job I ever got fired from, by the way. 2 weeks in, I think I was exactly 2 weeks in. Let's say I started on a Thursday. This was 2 Thursdays later. She's yelling at me for something. Now, I also got a little glimpse into Long Island Bagels, an institution, right? There's one of two things you could do at a bagel place, apparently. You could make your dough in-house, right? A lot of them import water from Brooklyn for this because supposedly with the bagels, New York Bagels is all about the Brooklyn water, okay? So a lot of them really did import water from Brooklyn. Or you could import the dough. from Brooklyn or Queens, and they'd be ready-made bagels. You just seed them accordingly, poppy, sesame, everything, whatever, and pop them in the oven. That's what she did. So she didn't make her dough in-house, so it was a little bit of an easier operation. So what you would do in the morning, you would receive the dough from these shipping companies, you would line them up, and then these dollies would have the baking trays with the bagel dough on them stacked. And then, if I'm remembering correctly, the entire cart went in these ovens, these floor-to-ceiling ovens. And then they would bake. You set the timer manually, and then they would bake for 14 minutes, whatever it was. But interestingly enough, I don't know if she had more antiquated equipment or something. It wasn't automatic. You had to start and stop the ovens, or you would burn the batch of bagels. So, in other words, once you had that in, you had to remember or set a timer, or else they were going to burn. It was like kind of like baking at home back then. Like, it wasn't any more sophisticated than that. So I burn a batch of bagels, and she's pissed because, and I'm in retrospect, you're thinking, okay, you just probably blew hundreds of dollars. You just burnt this entire thing of bagels, maybe 14 trays of bagels or something. And now you don't even have bagels. So now you got to get them in. You're going to be behind the morning rush, the whole thing. And she's yelling and she's screaming at me. And I remember yelling back at her or giving her some sort of guff. And she was just like, "You're fired." And I think I was probably fixing to quit anyway, but I'll never forget. She was I got my stuff. She's standing at the door with my 2 paychecks. I hadn't even been paid yet because I think I got paid bi-weekly. She has the 2 paychecks in her hand, and she's raising them. And she has her other hand on her hip, and she's not looking at me. And she's just waiting for me to walk out the door and grab my checks. And I snatched them, and I left, and I was fired. And I think I was probably feeling too like Dagan, not the multitasker that I would later witness at the restaurants. It was like I'd be in the weeds with 3 tables type of thing. It was probably that thing rearing its head where I just wasn't fast enough to get the bagel and then make the bagels and then cream cheese and put the schmear on and, do an egg and cheese order or whatever. Like, I just wasn't quick enough for that. But that was an interesting memory. And I remember that was the type of thing, too, where it was like, thank God I was wise enough not to burn my bridges with the previous job. So I just went back to Wolbaum's like nothing happened.
Right.
And, a thing, too, where it was like maybe food service wasn't going to be for me because I had friends like Adam who worked at McDonald's. We would go in, he'd load up a sack of food for us, that type of thing. But I never had any fast food or restaurant experience. My friend Matt's parents owned a really successful restaurant, that type of thing. But I never dabbled in any of that. It was really strictly the supermarket for me and a couple of odds and ends. So that was the first time dealing with that and seeing how hard it was too. And I think it would have been better if I had a more patient boss, a slightly more friendly or easygoing boss. But she expected a lot. She was a sort of a tense and nervous business owner, but also just not friendly. She wasn't kid friendly. She didn't care that you were a kid. She kind of treated everybody the same. Just one of those personalities where it was like, I can't see living with this, 30 hours a week. This is going to be too tough.
Yeah. How key is the friend that works at McDonald's, by the way? I must say, I'm pretty sure the only job I ever really applied for, like took an application and applied for, was to McDonald's, and they never called me back.
Really?
Yeah, the one in Patchogue. I applied there because when you're 14, you can start working. So I was actually quite eager to start working at that time. I think that was before I even found my way to the aforementioned stables.
Yeah,
like, McDonald's. Damn, dude, I'll fucking eating good over here, my friend.
Well, you're always thinking that, right? Like you get a free. I don't think they even get a free meal per shift anymore. I think they get like 30% off their food or something.
And at the deli, they used to get mad at me for or Kathy used to yell at me for eating too much. Like, we would get like a shipment of bagels, for instance, every day, but we wouldn't get very many. And they were made basically not for a la carte eating, but just for if people want like certain egg sandwiches or whatever. But I would just eat like an egg everything. And we only had like 3 of them. So I would just eat one of them every day. And they'd be like, "Can you stop eating one of the egg everythings? Like, we need these." Dag, I wanted to ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
About where are you with your kids as far as them getting jobs? Do you want them to work? Like, I think today, I mean, I see the value in it, but I have to admit that I'm of 2 minds with it, and I'm not a parent, so maybe my mind will adapt. But when I was younger, I kind of understood the point a lot more, being like, get a job, figure it out, and all of that. But I do look back with a little bit of consternation where I'm like, you know what, Dad, like, would it have really have killed you to just give me like $20 or $30 a week so I didn't have to do this? And I know that sounds very selfish, but it's not. It's just saying, like, why did I have to go through all these trials and tribulations when I could have like done better in school and been more focused and been happier? And I look at it sometimes like that where I'm like, this is kind of cruel. It's like, you know, it's like, it's no skin off your back. Like, I'm working my ass off for like $50 here. It's no skin off your back that you could have just been like, fine, I'll give you half that much and you can be sane and have free time in your life and all that, you know? So I know that a lot of parents are not in that position. But I think many parents are, where it's like, it's not, we're not talking about adult levels of money. We're talking about enough for you to go fuck around with your friends. And to Dad's credit, once in a while, he would give me like and I've said that in the past, like, it would be surprising. Like, he's like, yo, here's $20. You want to go? And I'll be like, what? But so I'm of two minds. I'm curious what you think of that. Like, do you want your kids to work, or would you rather just kind of pay them to study and pay, you know, give them a nominal amount of money to kind of keep them occupied, but keep them focused and free?
I think about this a lot. I really think about this a lot. And of course, I naturally compare it to my experience as a kid their age and the way I grew up. And there's some parallels and there's some differences. It's really interesting because you have to realize they're not you and they're not in the same circumstance. But with my two kids, first of all, they have what I had growing up. They have very generous grandparents. They actually have very generous grandparents on both sides, where our maternal grandparents were particularly generous and good to us. So they have that. There's also a bit like, you want your kids to have a work ethic. And I think Mom and Dad, especially for Dana and I, and I guess for Allie a little bit too, you came along much later. So I think they were already, their personalities had already relaxed by the time you even came along. But they were very much of a mind of push the kids out of the nest, let them fly on their own, let them see. I think that was the inherent wisdom there. And I think it might have also been a little taste of, let's see what they like. Maybe they respond to blue collar work and they want to do that. And they want to kind of go up through the ranks and work in produce, maybe become a produce manager, maybe become a district manager, or work in the corporate division for these stores, or who knows, even stay at the store level, whatever. Or maybe it gives them the ownness or the inspiration to say, okay, this isn't for me. I have more of a white collar mindset, or I want to do this, or I want to do art, or I want to get into medical school, whatever it is, right? But it's a life experience. So you're accruing different experiences. You're seeing how it is. You're seeing how these people are, how happy they are, how content they are, how content you are with the paycheck every week, all of that thing. It all plays in to experience. So none of it hurts. And for me, I have to say, I have to really kind of admit this for myself, knowing how irresponsible I was just academically in high school. Even if I didn't work the full-time job. And Mom and Dad pushed other things on me too, like Boy Scouts, which in retrospect, I would have gave up when I was 11. They kept me in it until I was 17 and insisted that I go. In retrospect, I'm really grateful for that because the experiences and the friendships. But I think I still would have been very irresponsible with school and just sort of phoned it in anyway, whether I worked or not. But I have to say, my kids, I have a 10th grader now, so I could say this with confidence. They take school so much more seriously than I did. And even even your nephew, my 12-year-old, Graydon's so responsible with school. They get, straight A's, maybe the errant B once in a while. They take it really, really seriously, to the point of like taking it so much more seriously than Helene and I ever instilled. Like, we're very lucky with that. So there is a big part of me that says, like, all right, like, let them, school is hard. I mean, Lily is in the thick of it right now. She's in 10th grade. This is as hard as it's going to get.
Yeah, 10th grade's rough, man.
She's doing really well. So it's like, do we disrupt that flow? Not only that, but Lilia has a debit card and a checking account now. And she also has access to my Apple Pay in case she gets jammed up. This kid will not spend money. She has a savings account that she refuses to dip into. And she asks me, like, if she could buy a Starbucks on my Apple Pay before. She would never use it without even asking me. Like, she's very, very responsible with money, for as spoiled as my kids are. So it really worked out where I see the habits forming, and I see the personalities around money and valuing the dollar and all of that. And they grew up more fortunate than we grew up, and they grew up with more handouts than we grew up with. But I think it's all going in the right direction. I think both of my kids are going to want to work. I think they're both going to want to just have little jobs because, again, Lilia is so afraid to spend money, which is really odd. I thought when she had the debit account that she was just going to go on a shopping spree. Like, I gave her no, and she got mad at me for that. She was like, you're not putting any faith in me. And I was like, all right, let's do it and see. And I was kind of really apprehensive. And Helene was more of the mind, like, you got to trust her. You know what I mean? Because she was always a very wanty kid. She always wanted to collect something when she was a kid, certain toys or clothes, or I want these shoes. But ever since she's had her own money and it's been at her fingertips, she's been very responsible with that. And I think, and Graydon's always been a saver. I mean, he has a huge savings account, and he's never been the type to really want to spend money. The only thing my kids don't do, and where Helene and I butt heads, is that they don't have chores. And nothing consistent anyway. Graydon's a little more prone to be agreeable to chores, where Lily is a little more lazy with it. But, Helene grew up, upper middle class. She never wanted for anything, but she did chores. She was expected to work around the house. I mean, Helene cleaned the bathroom as a kid, like that type of thing. Her sisters too. And we never did. We grew up with less, but we never did chores. So there's always that thing of like the kids should do more around the house. But for me, I think until they graduate from high school, maybe even college, you could argue, Kyle, I think their job is to do well in school. Right now you're forming your path, especially because my kids, they have interests. Like Lily wants to go to art school. Graydon has certain interests in, especially in I think Graydon really wants to get into programming and video games and stuff like that, some sort of engineering, computer engineering. But my big thing with school and academic pursuits and the scholastic stuff is keep all your options open by doing well in everything and work up to your potential. I said, I tell them, like, if you were guys, honestly, if you were D students and you were half an idiot, I wouldn't hold you to getting straight A's. But since you're so smart, you have to kind of be beholden to your talents and your abilities. So that's what I expect. And I say, Grandma and Grandpa didn't do that with me. However smart or not smart I was, I don't know. But they didn't really hold me accountable in school. It was more of a well-rounded approach. With them, I'm more of the mind, it's okay. Earn the value of $1. I think Helene and I have gotten a little lucky so far. But know the value of $1. Don't think it's just coming to you. But your job is to do well in school right now. And I'm pretty comfortable most of the time adhering to that. The only time I go off course with that is seeing some of the kids' contemporaries in the neighborhood, whether it's their friends or, colleagues in school, classmates. And I know these kids and I know their parents since kindergarten. And they have the same means as Helene and I, and they have the same sort of philosophies and stuff. But their kids are also working at McDonald's. Then I'm like, well, maybe my kids can do more. You know what I mean? Maybe they can work at Rita's Water Ice or take a weekend shift at Wawa or something. Would it really hurt? And my kids are smart enough where I don't think that 10-hour shift a week or whatever, two 5-hour shifts is really going to get in the way of that report card. Sure. You know what I mean? Or doing well in school or staying responsible academically and stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't had to deal with it. So I feel like I always understood. I never understood the true value of $1 until I started earning it. That is true. But I also feel like it was many things that taught me the value of money, and also just my total paranoia and OCD of not having any. So I just saved. By the time when I was an adult, I just stopped spending money. And for the most part, and I think as long as a kid is instilled with the understanding that it doesn't just materialize, that there's incredible sacrifice. Like people congratulate, like, oh, Colin, you do such a great job with Last Stand. And I'm like, thank you, dude. But it was so hard to get here. And I blew up my life like twice to do it. You know, it's like there's so much. So there's more than just the inherent value of the dollar. It's like all the sacrifice and the inertia that goes into making any of the money and all. It for different people, it's going to come loaded with different stuff. So it's always interesting. But I agree with you. Mom and Dad didn't seem especially concerned about our academics. I mean, I think I cared because I was competitive with my peers. I didn't care for any other reason. And I don't know why that is, that they never really instilled that in us. I think they were pretty much done by the time they got to me.
Yeah, I theorize about it. I mean, Mom grew up. I mean, you know how much I love Grandma and Grandpa. I mean, Mom's parents, I mean, they were everything to me, and they were the best people. But, you know, Mom grew up a princess. I'm not sure there were that many expectations put on her. Even with nursing school, I think the caveat was like, well, try it. And if you fail, who cares? You know, type of thing. I don't think it was laissez-faire out of non-love, because I know how much Grandma and Grandpa loved everybody. I think it was more of, you know, an easygoing protectiveness, you know, of like, don't save yourself from the anxiety of life. Like, it'll work out, sort of like, you know, being able to a more of a nurture rather than a hard line. Like, look, I'm pushing you out of the nest. You better flap those wings or you're going to hit the ground. Dad had a very contentious relationship, especially with his mom passed when he was 17. And he had a contentious relationship with his father, who basically forbid Dad from going to school, or saying like, you know, you want to go to school for engineering, but I'm not going to help you. So sort of thrust Dad into a more blue collar way of life, or Dad was going to have to try to find a way to pay his own way. And this was late in the 60s, a very different time, to go to school for something where he could have had a job, you know, a white collar job, an office job, something that was more lucrative. So I think that it came from that. And I think, yeah, Mom and Dad sort of had this philosophy of, I think they had a little bit of both of those things. I think they had a nurture where it was like, it's going to work out. And they always said, you know, you're going to find what you love, do what you love. It doesn't have to be law. Doesn't have to be medicine. They would say like, maybe you'll do janitorial stuff at a school. Maybe you'll be a sanitation worker, but you'll do that thing that you're passionate about. That was always their bent. And I never thought it came from a lack of education, because neither of our parents went to college until much later on. Now they're highly educated. But back then I never got that. I got that they were more, you know, that was the other thing we grew up with, Kyle, that we were lucky. There were no familial pressures on us. Like, there was no inheriting the family business. There was no, you're going to be the 5th generation of doctor. You're going to be, you know what I mean? There was none of that. It was like you had carte blanche to do whatever you wanted. You know, there was no lineage. There were no expectations, which we were lucky about too. And it is funny how it worked out. For me, it worked out because I think I always knew in the back of my mind, like I was going to draw, like I was going to make cartoons. That's the only thing I ever really emotionally responded to that got me excited. The other thing that I got excited about, I just wasn't good enough to do for a living in skateboarding, you know? So it was like, it was always going to be that. It was always going to be drawing cartoons. So, you know, it worked out. The only thing I want to mention to you, Kyle, is going back to wool bounds. I had a chapter in my life. I don't talk about this a lot, and I used to be embarrassed about it, but I have to cop to this. And you'll remember, I had a period in my life, graduated from college in 98, became an animator, worked for a few years, was doing great, and then 9/11 happened. And in animation, particularly on the East Coast, we were thriving off the .com boom. So we were doing all the traditional animation and design services for these companies, Nickelodeon and Disney, where they had an internet presence now, and other things, DreamWorks, the internet was a new thing, and it was another area for animation. And when 9/11 happened, it exploded, right? The .com crash happened, and a lot of us lost work. And there was a period of months where I couldn't find work. Now, this was prior to me having a family. Helene and I were newly engaged, so we didn't have any mortgage yet, no children, obviously. But I couldn't find work in animation, living back on Long Island at the time. And I had to take a job at Woolbounds, a different store, in Nassau County. I lived in Nassau County now. And I went back into that world as I was probably 25, 26 years old at that time. And I went back into that blue collar world of working in the produce department with these guys. And I have to say, it was the same thing. It was a nervous time for me, not knowing where my career was going and having to take this much less lucrative job. But it was such a nice time to be back with the same people, these same type of people, different people, but that warmth, the family, the way they welcomed me into the fold, the way they would love you as long as you carried, your own weight on your shoulders and contributed. They welcome you into being part of the family. And these guys in particular, man, talk about comedic geniuses. There was one guy, Carl, that I worked with at this time. He was an older guy, probably in his 40s at the time, had a family. Yeah, Carl, I'm waiting for you, Carl. He would do the craziest things. Like, he would just make you laugh all day long. And, having that captive audience only egged him on. So he would go, and if there was an old lady like rifling through the cucumbers and making a mess, he would go right in front of her and start organizing them and fixing them again, without, as close to her as he could get without touching her, that type of thing. And it was that type of like tomfoolery all day long. And those are the same guys that sat me down one day. We had coffee, and it was so nice just to be invited. You're with all these 30 and 40 somethings, these old timers. Worked with this guy, Joe. He used to commute from Queens every day. And they used to sit me down, just having coffee with them and being included as part of the group, And they sat me down one day, bought me a cup of coffee, and they had this earnest conversation with me. I was right on the eve of getting married. I was like a couple of months out, and they sat me down like, dude, don't do it. To the point where I thought they were kidding, because they were always kidding. They were always joking. And they weren't. They were all married men. And they were all together with their wives, but they were all like, dude, just don't. And it was like one of the most crazy experiences of my life, because I spent the first 10 minutes of this conversation listening to it, thinking they were kidding. And they weren't. They just loved me so much that they were just like, and I guess they were all like a little bit unhappy. They're married for 30 years, some of these guys. They were like having this earnest, heartfelt conversation with me of don't get married. Like, in other words, saying like, you're too young, sow your oats, or just generally don't do it. Hilarious. But I miss those dudes because they were just that cast of characters that color your life at that point in time. And of course, animation has those. We haven't been in the same studio with each other for a couple of years due to the pandemic, but there was something special about that blue collar work and those people that I worked with at those jobs that is kind of like, it's a little different. It's a little different than my actual career in animation. It's a little different than the friends and the relationships I formed. It was something special. I think because of the work. I think because it was hard work, and because these guys were kind of, I don't know, they knew they were relegated to this a lot in life, and just, again, that spirit of making the best of it and enjoying it and savoring it for what it was worth, and just having a lighthearted approach to life. I think there was a wisdom in that I don't see necessarily in some of my other relationships that I formed later on, particularly in my career in TV animation. It's been different, so it was cool to look back at this stuff and think about those guys.
Yeah, it is fun to think about. I think you're right too, that it's the nature of the work. It's the camaraderie. You're worried about different things. You've done different things. I think that blue collar work is often looked at as more plug and play than white collar work. Like, people are like, well, you don't need many skills or minimal skill or whatever. And I'm like, I think that might be true, but I think that there's just more movement at the top, or I shouldn't say at the top, with the white collar workers, and blue collar workers, I think, are just more, in my experience, just way more down to earth people, typically friendlier people, not so much of a stick up their ass. I don't know. I've always been very attracted to the blue collar people, and maybe we technically kind of grew up blue collar ourselves in some sense that evolved over time, but I think we both have those connections, and maybe that speaks to letting kids work when they're young, but we both have those connections through our youth, through seeing adults and seeing kind of the way it goes. So Dig, let's end it there. The Jets are on and I need to go watch them. But let's end this episode of KnockBack like we do each and every week with a dad joke.
All right. I'm excited about this one because I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I feel like you could get this one. Kyle, what product is Australia's biggest import-export?
I don't know.
Kyle, the boomerang. Now, that comes to us from James Ketchum. I edited it a little bit. I kind of changed up the format on James.
Yeah, that's okay.
But the idea, the seed was planted.
You tightened it. Yeah, I totally appreciate that. Well, it was a good joke. I've heard better ones, but it was a good joke. I have the game just started, but I'm watching it here. It's right on my phone. You can just.
Oh, it started squarely at 1.
Oh yeah. They don't waste any time. Dig, I appreciate your time today. By the way, we're recording on a Sunday late because we both had scheduling problems. So I appreciate you working around my own scheduling problems. No problem. And I appreciate all of you guys out there for your love, kindness, and support. Thank you so much for supporting us on Patreon, especially where you can get the show a week early and ad-free if you support us over there. Submit your questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas, topic ideas, and so on. I think that's it. We'll see you next time for KnockBack. Until then, goodbye.
Go Jets.
KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagen Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.